healthcare is actually connected to domestic violence. I don't know if you saw this recent study. For the first time, Verizon commissioned this study, and they actually connect chronic illness in women with domestic violence.
Absolutely. Those of us doing this a long time have been making that case. I mean, for example, we're now talking about football players. Football players who played in high school, college, pros, get concussions. They're now being told by their doctors, look, this could have impact on you. Do you have memory loss? They're going through it. What makes us think that a woman who's banged up against her bedroom wall a half a dozen times or 100 times, strangled to the point of unconsciousness, what makes us think that the same advice, the same help shouldn't be available? What makes us think all those people coming back? My wife and I are deeply involved in dealing with the families of veterans coming home. 300,000 of the 2.8 million are coming home with post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury. Why would we think a woman who's been held captive, beaten to within an inch of her life, literally lived in constant fear, why would they not have the same impacts on themselves?
It sounds like you know so much about this, which I know you do because you've been such an advocate for 20 plus years. Is there, I mean, I know I got into it because of some of my own experiences, but
Thank
for
you for writing about it.
Thank you. I'm grateful to have been able to do it and have a way to do it. But what about you? Was there a particular story? Was there somebody that you knew that made you say, I got to fight for this?
It was my dad. My dad used to say, you know, I'll bet every one of you, your cameramen as well, can remember there's some phrase their mother or father used more than 100 times when they're growing up. My dad used to say, my word, and everybody who listening to this, who I was raised with, will know. My dad used to say, the ultimate sin is the abuse of power. And the ultimate abuse of power is a man raising his hand to a woman. And so my father was a quiet, gentle man, but it was in the gut. We were raised that, and we were raised that if you see it, you have an obligation to do something about it.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because, you know, 3% of the victim calls here in this facility are from men actually who are abused.
Who are abused, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is not just a situation where women are abused, but to those men, you know, there's so much shame and humiliation associated with it. For men, it's got to be that much more amplified. What do you say to some of these men out there who are going through that right now?
What I say to them is, look, and let me say another way. When I speak to large audiences of primarily men, I do the Chamber of Commerce, those kinds of things, and I say, the first thing they say is, well, if you're being abused, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just leave? And I say to them, guys, when you were growing up and the bully was the guy who took your lunch money at school, what'd your father tell you? Just pop him in the nose. And they'll go, yeah. And I'll say, how many of you guys did it? How many of you did it? How many of you did it? No, they didn't do it. And I'd say, why? And you'd see them put their heads down. Try it. Well, you guys try it with your friends. What they'll say is, oh, that really would have made a madman.
And you have been in this long enough to know, because I hear the same thing when I speak about this. That's also the question they have for women.
That is the question.
So how do we make that shift from why doesn't she just leave to the real question, which is why does he hit her?
Exactly.
And how do we stop that?
Look,
what can you do to...
The reason, this is the God's truth, the reason I wrote the Violence Against Women Act in the beginning was to change that cultural norm. No means no means no. Whether it's in the bedroom, on the street, whether you're drunk or sober, it's no. No means no. And everybody says, well, how can you say that? You know, how many times you hear a woman blamed? I held 1,000 hours of hearings on this. Young women would testify before us and say, they'd say, this happened to me, that happened. I'd ask the question, what was the response to your girlfriends? They said, well, why were you wearing what you were wearing? Why were you in... And
how do we change that, though?
The way to change that is begin to educate the public. For example, what I say to men, I say, if a man gets drunk in a bar and he's just dead drunk, he staggers out of the bar, walking down the street, he gets mugged and a concussion. Does anybody blame him? No, they don't. They go ahead and they blame who they should, the robber, the mugger. Well, why do we still have this cultural norm that somehow, look, there was a young woman that testified before my committee when I started holding the hearings, a lovely, smart young woman who was still in college. She was a senior in college. And when she was a freshman, at the first college she went to, was during orientation period. I'll never forget what she said. She said, we had a bonfire before the first day of school, before the first football game. She went to a small college outside of Pittsburgh. And she said, my girlfriend's boyfriend, who was a junior or sophomore, said, I'll walk you back to your dorm. So I walked back with him. He said, I'm cold. I want to get my coat. We come in and get while I get my coat. She walked in with him. He went in the room and he raped her. She panicked afterwards, ran back to her room. She's a freshman. She goes up to the top floor of her, and I'll never forget what she said. She said, the first thing I did was rip off my clothes and take a scalding shower. She said, then wrapped in a towel, I was sitting in the end of my bed, and the resident advisor, the older student who runs the dorm, came in and said, what happened? And I told her what happened, and she said, you've been raped. And she said, I remember what I said. I said, no, I haven't. I knew him.
Yeah, which started the whole
dating, which is
rape.
the mindset that we've got to change the mindset for our daughters as well as our sons.
A lot of people, though, and you know this too, when you're out speaking, we get asked the question, what legally can we do? Because it feels like to a lot of these women and people in general who are abused, they don't have the support of law enforcement. Is there some sort of provision or amendment we could put in the Violence Against Women Act?
There is. One of the things we changed in the Violence Against Women Act, we learned early on that it used to be the police would not arrest on information. That's a fancy phrase of saying if the police were called, you and I were on a date and I had punched you, okay? And you had a big black eye and I'm standing over you, I'm taller and bigger than you and I'm more powerful than you, and a policeman comes up and says, do you want to swear out charges against him? And I'm standing there looking at you. You know that what's going to happen is I'll get out on bail and I may be back. So we changed it. They can now arrest on information. They don't have to have you say, yes, he did this to me. All they have to observe, you are beaten up, he's standing there, there's reason to believe he did it, to arrest him, to take the pressure off of the woman so that she is not frightened. We've changed the way in most states now. We've given police training and funding whereby they have specific units. I mean, when I started this whole thing, there were police officers, testimony would say, all right, that happened, but I won't even say with the camera. They'd say, well, did you enjoy it? I mean, the most degrading, terrible things.
It's awful.
But we have really changed the way in the vast majority of police departments through the funding mechanisms that they have to have training for their police to teach them, acculturate them about what this is about. But this is all about changing the norm.
Changing the mindset.
It's changing. And just as it's still there, but harassment in the office place isn't like it used to be. It still exists.
Right.
Still exists, but it's not the same way. Violence against women reporting is up and violence is down about 60%. So we can do this, but you just got to keep punching at it. It's like mowing the lawn. You got to keep at it and keep at it. But most of all, what these people here are doing, they are letting these women who call know there's hope.
Yeah, know that there's somebody behind
know
them,
there's
'cause
someone
that's the
there.
toughest thing. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.